2番、行くぞ! So in my last video, I talked about how reading, writing, listening, and speaking are the same thing. Let's get into that today. So while all four of these are basically the same thing, today I'm gonna have to break them down into smaller components, just so they're a little bit more digestible. And I probably won't have time to go over all four, so we're gonna focus primarily on reading and writing. So first, let's begin with reading. I've already mentioned there's no such thing as a perfect resource for learning how to read. There are a multitude of games, there are a multitude of books, or if you're lazy, get an app. One of the things I would suggest though if you get an app is don't get a language learning app. Weirdly enough, these things are counterproductive. See, in essence, these apps are actually kind of good. They force you to immerse yourself in the language. How the language looks, the sentence structure, how it sounds, all great. Issue is, it goes against the core principle of what I'm trying to teach, is that do not translate the language. And these apps force you to kind of understand the language in your own native language, which is actually very counterproductive to the system. I've already said this a few times, but for emphasis, I'm gonna say it again. Do not try to translate the language. This new language operates in a different framework. If you translate, it is inefficient, and it is gonna confuse you down the road. So, just don't do that. But the basic premise here is you have to learn how the language looks and how it sounds. This is actually easier said than done. I'm gonna tell you now of a few mistakes that you will probably make. Now, if you're coming from a Latin-based alphabet, transitioning towards Japanese, you might have a little bit of a difficulty, as Japanese is actually phonetic, with a mix of pictographs. If you're not aware yet, Japanese is a mix of hiragana, katakana, and kanji. Hiragana and katakana are phonetic, kanji is a mix of pictographs with multiple ways of pronouncing it. What does this mean? In hiragana and katakana, a is a, ka is ka, ga is ga, ku is ku. But when you get to kanji, suddenly one symbol has a multitude of ways to pronounce, the way it's read, depending on how it's combined with other symbols. But let's maybe not get into that yet. Now, this is gonna sound a little weird, but try to stick with me here. As you are trying to learn this language, you are most likely to perceive this language through the lens of your language. By that means, you probably see ka as the Romaji ka. You most probably see ku as the Romaji ku. This is wrong though, because you're actually missing quite a lot. Don't feel bad though. It's just really impossible to perceive these systems if your base language does not have these systems. So let me give you an example, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Let's use the word oo, which means yes. A lot of foreigners assume that actually means oo. As a Filipino speaker, you can easily identify that this is not the same thing, but they are unable to perceive this just because their language does not have this system. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is, as you learn how this hiragana and katakana is pronounced, you should be always aware that you are missing some information. And it's not your fault. It's just that you really don't have a choice, as your language does not have these systems, these accents, these tones. The best you could do is to be extra aware of how native speakers and how native content is presented. Always tell yourself that you're not getting the full extent of what the language is actually sending your way. You're only picking up a small amount. And that's okay. So, in summary, learn how the language is read. But don't be overconfident, because you are missing some information. So, in direct connection to this, I would like to state that if you are using Romaji, immediately stop. Immediately switch over to learning how hiragana and katakana is read. If there's a kanji symbol, you can rely on the furigana. My point is, just don't rely on the Romaji. It's really going to slow you down. My next statement is going to sound a bit like a contradiction, but believe me, it's not. It's just how the brain works. So, here we go. As you are learning to perceive the phonetics of the hiragana and the katakana, do not memorize them. Instead, learn words. Your subconscious will comprehend the writing and the sound much faster if there is something for it to associate it to. For example, it's much harder to learn su than shi rather than sushi. So the best way to do this, probably have a chart on one hand as you have a list of words on the other, and you are looking how it is pronounced and comparing it to the word in total, all the while aware that you are missing information. That's it for the basics of reading. Let's move on to writing. So, in regards to writing, there are only two outcomes here. 3, if you consider giving up an outcome. But barring that, there's 2. The first one is you're going to try to avoid writing. You're going to try to find a shortcut or some method to just keep learning the language without ever jotting it down on paper. And then you're going to waste a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time, trying to find a way not to do this because it is boring. And eventually you're going to realize you're going to have to do it, and you just wasted all that time trying to avoid it. Or, you could just choose option 2, which is accept that you have to write it and just do it. That chart I was telling you about to learn how to pronounce the language and how to write the language and read the language, yeah, use that also. This chart should be anything, just random words that you want to say in Japanese. If you don't have a chart, or if you're lazy to make one, then look around you. Find out what this is called in Japanese. What's a bed in Japanese? What is an electric fan in Japanese? What is a pillow in Japanese? And just write it down. It's not that hard. Be aware of the stroke order though, because you're going to have to get that properly written down as you transition to kanji, which we're not going to go over here yet, but be very, very aware of how that works. So that's it. Learn to read, learn to write. It's not rocket science. I mentioned a little bit about perception and how you should hear it. I'm probably going to do that in the next video, part 3. So, if you want to see that one and you'd like to hear more, then subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next week.